Chapter 2469. The Great Buddha. Chapter 2469. The Great Buddha. Several Buddhist cultivators under the tutelage of Shinyan Buddha, Lord, now stepped forward, their eyes radiating the frightening light of Buddha, aimed toward Yi Futian and the others. Yi Futian frowned. These people really wanted to start something? Under the examination of Buddha's clairvoyance, Feng Xiyuan and the others felt extreme discomfort. Since they had no way to resist, it was as if everything of theirs were being exposed. Furthermore, surreal images appeared behind them. It was a vision enabled by the Great Path's superpowers. Of course, even more cultivators fixed their attention on Yi Futian. The Buddha's clairvoyance could detect all truths. When cultivated to its extreme, it was rumored that the life and death of all living beings could be seen. The detection of cultivation method was but only a small trick this superpower was capable of. It was one of the many uses of Buddha's clairvoyance. However, at the moment, Yi Futian's entire body dazzled with divine light. It was as if there was a protective layer of light about him, which even the Buddha's clairvoyance was unable to invade. Under the surveillance of those heavenly eyes, nothing substantial could be seen. They could only see Yi Futian standing there quietly, surrounded by divine light. He was tremendous and imposing as he stood there. The sense of transcendence was palpable. Watching the sight before them, many sneered coldly inside. It seemed that Yi Futian was indeed exceptional. The Buddha's clairvoyance was of absolutely no use against him. Yi Futian was like an enigma that couldn't be understood or captured. Yi Futian continued standing there quietly, his eyes frosty cold. His eyes were ever-changing as he looked toward those Buddhist cultivators who were looking back at him. This one look seemed to bring those cultivators into another world, another space. I come from the divine prefecture in awe of Buddhism, observing the commandments of all Buddhas fest. But what are you all doing? Yi Futian chided them, and his voice reverberated through the void. The hearts of those Buddhist cultivators shuddered. Many of them experienced a prickly pain in their third eye. Not only did they fail to see through Yi Futian, but also they were affected by him. The cultivators in the far distance were a little shocked when they beheld this scene. This Yi Futian was truly remarkable. However, at this time, above the void, there were two figures surrounded by the blazing light of Buddha. Many monks would bow to salute these two whenever they encountered them. One of them was an old monk, while the other was quite young. They were both under the tutelage of Shinyan Buddha Lord. The old monk was a cultivator who had survived the divine tribulation of the Great Path, while the young man was the first disciple under Shinyan Buddha Lord, known as Shinyan Arhat. The two of them looked at Yi Futian at the same time, and a pair of elusive eyes appeared in the void. They were somewhat similar to the Buddha's clairvoyance, which was used previously by Zhu Ho. However, their prowess was not comparable, not even close. Under the scrutiny of Buddha's clairvoyance, Yi Futian felt that even with the power of the Great Path protecting around him, he was completely transparent. It was like nothing could be hidden from the other's prying gaze. He even wondered whether it was a mistake in coming to the sacred land of Western Heaven. The abilities of these Buddhist cultivators were completely different from those practiced in the divine prefecture. These abilities could see into too many secret things. As the old monk unleashed the Buddha's clairvoyance, his eyes grew unsteady. It was as the images he was perceiving frightened him a little. What he saw was not Yi Futian, who was surrounded simply by the divine light of the Great Path, but a massive towering figure that resembled a deity. This figure was a little fuzzy to him. Even at his advanced cultivation level, he was unable to discern it completely. He knew that his realm was not high enough, and his Buddha's clairvoyance was far from reaching the ultimate peak form. But there was no doubt in his mind that the images he saw were a foreshadowing of sorts. At least, Yi Futian would be a super powerful existence in the future, which accounted for the vision that had appeared before them. You came from the divine prefecture, and stirred up a storm in 6 Desires Heaven. You slaughtered our cultivators of Buddhism. Now you show up here on the sacred land of the Western Heaven. What is your intention? The old monk interrogated him with a voice as great as a bell ringing. Each other word shook Yi Futian to his core. Yi Futian felt his heart palpitate as his breathing became unsteady. Suddenly, he could clearly sense that the other's eyes seemed to pry into something more. Something invisible and untraceable moved. The stronger he was, the harder it was to detect his cultivation. I heard that the sacred land of the Western Heaven is the holy land of Buddhism. But the visit today was rather disappointing. As for why I am here, is there any reason why I'm not allowed on the sacred land of the Western Heaven? Yi Futian retorted as he raised his eyes to look at the other. His stance and aura were not any lesser. Even when he repudiated a cultivator who had survived the divine tribulation of the Great Path. After all, before this moment, he had killed many cultivators who had survived the divine tribulation of the Great Path. The sacred land of Western Heaven is the holy land of Buddhism. Naturally, people are allowed to come and seek Buddha's enlightenment. However, it is inappropriate for you to come to the holy land of Buddhism after you have slaughtered disciples of Buddhism. A powerful Buddhist cultivator in the distant void now spoke up. It seemed that many people were aggrieved with Yi Futian in this sacred land of Western Heaven. Since Yi Futian stepped into the Western world of Buddhism, everything he did had angered many people. Every one of those Lord-level figures that had died at his hands was considered a powerful force in the world of Buddhism. But because of someone like him who came from the divine prefecture, each of them had met their unfortunate death, which curtailed the power in the Buddhist world considerably. More importantly, Lord Initial Zen and Saint Jinchan themselves were Buddhists, cultivators belonging to the orthodoxy of Buddhism. Why would I slaughter disciples of Buddhism? Yi Futian retorted. He understood the displeasure these people had toward him. However, ever since he entered the Western world of Buddhism, he had been trapped in situations he had not created. It could be said that he could not find a peaceful moment. Under those circumstances, he had no choice but to struggle and resist. Hence, leading up to everything he encountered afterward. Humph! Cold disdain sounded in unison, as these Buddhists still seemed unwilling to let bygones be bygones. But at this moment, above the sky in the distance, a peaceful and benevolent light of Buddha flooded the sky, and a voice spoke. Amitabha. The sound of Buddha lingered, resounding through heaven and earth. A towering and sacred Buddha statue appeared on the distant horizon, cast with gold. However, this golden Buddha statue was on the move. It was as if it were not a statue but a real person. When they saw the appearance of this Buddha statue, numerous Buddhists who were present immediately bowed down to pay their respect, including countless cultivators from the sacred land of the Western Heaven. All of them clasped their hand in front of them to worship him. Many recognized this statue, as it was a Buddha commonly enshrined and worshipped by many in the sacred land of the Western Heaven. Buddha Lord. Greetings to the Buddha Lord. All these voices echoed one after the other, and those cultivators under the tutelage of the great Buddha were paying their respects with humility. The cultivators from Western Heaven were even more emotional. They were witnessing the manifestation of the Buddha, Lord, right in front of their eyes. Yi Futian's gaze also fixed in that direction. The golden Buddha statue was shining with infinite light of Buddha, sheltering all of the Western Heaven. He appeared quite advanced in age. He was clearly a great Buddha, who had cultivated for numerous years. Which Buddha Lord is this now? Yi Futian thought. Several Buddha Lords in the Western world of Buddhism were revered and worshipped by the world. The Buddha Lord that appeared now was probably not the Lord of all Buddhas. Benefactor Yi came all the way from the divine prefecture. And this is hardly our way of receiving guests. Chapter 2470, Grandmaster Yumu. Chapter 2470. Grandmaster Yumu. After Wutian Buddha Lord vanished, the expressions of those who were giving Yi Futian a hard time before turned to great displeasure. However, they did not dare to say anything that challenged the command of the Buddha Lord. They could only look at Yi Futian with disdain and said, "You have slaughtered our cultivators. But now you are asking for an audience with the Lord of all Buddhas. That's crazy man's talk." The Lord of all Buddhas had long transcended the world, no longer bound by the 5 elements of the earth. He was not someone who would receive visitors lightly. Not even those Buddha Lords could ask for an audience whenever they liked. Now all Buddhas Fest did pose an opportunity, but they would not agree to Yi Futian asking for an audience with the Lord of all Buddhas. Many of them looked at Yi Futian with a cold and indifferent expression. Even if there were a chance for Yi Futian to meet the Lord of all Buddhas, with them around, they would make sure that never happened. You are lucky that Wutian Buddha Lord made a personal appearance, someone commented coldly. Although they did not dare to make further trouble for Yi Futian, they still seemed quite angry. To them, it was as if Wutian Buddha Lord's words could not change their minds. This piqued Yi Futian's curiosity. What was the status of Wutian Buddha Lord in the world of Buddhism? Benefactor Yi, we will see each other again if it is meant to be, Tongchan Arhat said to Yi Futian with a smile. Suddenly, alertness was shown in Yi Futian's eyes. Again, he felt being spied upon, and knew that the thoughts he had previously may have been detected by the other. This superpower of telepathy was so incredible that it was easily forgotten by those around it. However, what he was thinking was nothing of great importance, so it didn't really matter. Tongchan Arhat turned to leave. The rest of the cultivators regarded Yi Futian with indifference. There were still many of them who were hostile towards him. At this time, a Buddhist cultivator suddenly appeared next to Yi Futian, invisible and soundless. He seemed to have emerged out of thin air. There was no warning prior to his appearance, which greatly alarmed Yi Futian. What a strange and uncanny superpower. Buddhist celerity, Yi Futian secretly remarked to himself, remembering one of the 6 superpowers of Buddhism. Buddhist celerity seemed to be an ultimate application of spatial methods, and somewhat superior to the great path of space. Its ability to travel freely anywhere without restriction was formidable. With Buddhist celerity, one could easily escape being chased by someone else of a higher realm. When used in tracking others, its success was even more spectacular. Wutian Buddha Lord was a Buddha Lord who specialized in Buddhist celerity. It seemed that this Buddhist cultivator, who had just appeared, cultivated the same skill as Wutian Buddha Lord. Yi Futian assessed the other man, and saw that the man had half of a kasaya hanging on the top half of his body, leaving one of his arms exposed. He looked to be in his mid-30s, simple and honest. He looked as if he was some kind of ascetic cultivator. Little monk, I am pleased to make your acquaintance, Benefactor Yi. The monk bowed to Yi Futian with his hands clasped in front of him. He appeared extremely courteous. Yi Futian returned his gesture and said, Yi Futian greets the Grandmaster. How is the Grandmaster to be addressed? Little monk, I am called Yumu, the monk replied. A strange look flashed across Yi Futian's eyes. The name Yumu also implied that great wisdom often lay in what appeared to be foolishness. Greetings, Grandmaster Yumu. Yi Futian saluted him once again. He was very grateful that Wutian Buddha Lord had recently saved him from a tough situation. This Grandmaster Yumu looked to be a cultivator under the tutelage of Wutian Buddha Lord, so Yi Futian was already partial to him, especially since he had been treated so rudely by so many Buddhist cultivators just now. Benefactor Yi is overly kind, Grandmaster Yumu said. Little monk, I came here mainly to assist Benefactor Yi in your questions. You are new to the sacred land of Western Heaven. If you have any questions, you can ask me. This Grandmaster Yumu had extraordinary cultivation, yet he consistently referred to himself as Little Monk. Moreover, he was invisible and soundless when he came. Yi Futian barely perceived the slightest aura before his arrival. If this Grandmaster Yumu had chosen to attack him, he would be in an unimaginable bind. There were also several others, such as Tongchan Arhat, who were exceptional cultivators themselves. These people may be the top Buddhist enchanting geniuses of their generation, and the methods of Buddhism they cultivated were unusual and peculiar. Even someone like Yi Futian was full of respect and in awe. He dared not underestimate these top figures. Therefore, even though Yumu referred to himself as Little Monk, Yi Futian was not so stupid as to follow suit. He merely said, if that's the case, then many thanks to Grandmaster Yumu. Please. Yumu extended his hand and gestured, but Yi Futian responded, Grandmaster Yumu, you first. Yumu nodded slightly, then turned to go. He deliberately slowed down to wait for Yi Futian, and only moved forward when Yi Futian had caught up to him. When many cultivators saw them leaving, their expressions were still one of cold apathy. However, with intervention from Wutian Buddha Lord, there was not much they could do now, but to drop the matter entirely. Therefore each of them dispersed. Soon, everyone left and disappeared without a trace. Yi Futian, and his party walked above the sacred land of Western Heaven with Yimu. Yi Futian said, Grandmaster Yimu, I was watching those cultivators from before, and they seemed somewhat to disapprove of the Grandmaster. In fact, he had something else he didn't say. Although the words of Wutian Buddha Lord had stopped the advancement of these foes, it did not seem to be a strong enough deterrent. At least, some of those people were still reluctant and continued to threaten Yi Futian verbally. It was not hard to judge their overall attitude. Yimu nodded and said, Benefactor Yi came from the divine prefecture, so you know that these same situations exist in every realm. The divine prefecture has 18 domains and 18 domain chiefs' manors. Even the great emperor's direct principality is under the control of someone different. How could they be expected to be of one single mind? From Yimu's reply, Yi Futian knew that he thoroughly understood the meaning behind his comment. Indeed, no matter which principality, there were inherently different factions, and it was impossible to be of one mind. When he first arrived in the world of Buddhism, he thought that the world of Buddhism was one united body, which in retrospect was somewhat a naive notion. Under the Lord of all Buddhas, there are many great Buddhas, and different Buddhas have different cultivational concepts. Under the Lord of all Buddhas, there are Buddhas who guard the world of Buddhism, enforce the laws of the Western world, and take charge of all matters in the world of Buddhism. The head of this branch is Tongchang Buddha Lord, Zhenchan Temple, which Benefactor Yi was in a prior altercation with, and Lord Initial Zen, who perished, all belong to this branch, Yimu explained. When Yi Futian heard this explanation, he immediately understood why Tongchan Arhat appeared so unfriendly. It seemed that Buddhist cultivators in this branch all borne the meaning of Zen in their name somewhere. In addition, there are also preaching Buddhas. This kind of Buddhist cultivation is responsible for the preaching of Buddhist teachings in the world of Buddhist. My master Wutian Buddha Lord belongs to this branch. There are also Buddhist cultivators who observe those cultivators in the world of Buddhism and listen to the voices within it. Finally, there are also Buddhas of penance who are devoted to Buddhism and care not for earthly affairs. Yi Futian nodded slightly when he heard the explanation from the man. He now had a rough understanding of the order of things and people. Thank you, Grandmaster, for your detailed explanation, he said. There is one other thing that I am quite curious about. It was said that hundreds of years ago, Dong Huang the Great came here to seek Buddhist instruction, taught by the Lord of all Buddhas himself. Previously, I have also heard that Dong Huang the Great had cultivated one of the 6 superpowers of Buddhism. Do you know which superpower he cultivated in? Asked Yi Futian. Was Tianyin Arhat the one who told this to you, Benefactor Yi? Yimu asked. He was. Yi Futian nodded. Previously, Tianyin Arhat found him and told him about it, but he didn't specify which superpower was cultivated by Dong Huang the Great. I'm afraid Benefactor Yi was deceived by Tianyin Arhat, Yimu replied. Tianyin Arhat lied? Yi Futian found that a little strange. So, Dong Huang the Great never came here to cultivate Buddhism, and the rumors we heard from the outside were false? Yi Futian was a little confused. Yimu shook his head. Of course it is true. Dong Huang the Great did come here to seek Buddhism teachings. However, Tianyin Arhat didn't know which was cultivated by Dong Huang the Great. As far as I know, only the Lord of all Buddhas and Dong Huang the Great himself know of this between them. Everything else you heard on the outside was totally hearsay. Not only Tianyin Arhat didn't know, but even Tianyin Buddha Lord himself does not necessarily know anything more about it. I see, Yi Futian nodded. Tianyin Arhat had told him that the Buddha had not said even a word. Perhaps even he did not know much more than the basics. However, that Tianyin Arhat was a funny character. At least he didn't mean Yi Futian any harm. When Tongchan Arhat appeared before, he had made sure to remind Yi Futian to be careful of the other man. Yimu, you are not me. How do you know that I don't know? Just as the two of them were speaking, a voice suddenly rang through their ears. This completely caught Yi Futian by surprise. He looked up into the distance and wondered, was he eavesdropping on them? This Buddha's clairaudience was indeed magical. He had been completely unaware of it. And you're not me. So how do you know that I don't know that you don't know? Yimu replied calmly. He didn't seem to take offense when he responded readily across the way. Yi Futian smiled when he heard the conversation between those two. I can't win with you. Of course you are right, Tianyin Arhut responded. And Yi Futian was a little surprised by his reply. It seemed that Yumu's combat effectiveness was more than met the eye. When he met Tianyin Arhut before, he had a feeling that the other was exceedingly exceptional. Now Tianyin Arhut claimed he was unable to best Yumu, indicating a noticeable gap in their combat effectiveness. However, Wutian Buddha Lord preached Buddhist teachings, and Yumu was the heir of Wutian Buddha Lord. It went without saying that he must be proficient in Buddhist teachings and methods, and his combat effectiveness was understandably powerful. I have one final question. If I want to see the Lord of all Buddhas, does Grandmaster Yumu have a way in? Yi Futian asked. Yumu was silent for a moment, and Tianyin Arhut, who was in the distance, did not speak either. Right after that, Yumu commented, It's probably a little hard, especially since you have already offended a lot of people among the Buddhist sects. Indeed, there is probably only one chance to meet the Lord of all Buddhas. All Buddhas Conference of Western Heaven will be held in the last month of All Buddhas Fest, at which time, all the Buddhas of Western Heaven will be there to discuss the Buddhist teachings and methods until the end of the fest. Since this would be the 10,000th year of the All Buddhas calendar, the Lord of all Buddhas will likely make an appearance this time around. However, this conference is strictly a meeting for all the Buddhas in Buddhism to exchange their methods and teachings, and all the major Buddhas will be present. If you attend, you will most certainly stick out like a sore thumb. Furthermore, you have offended many Buddhist cultivators. I don't think you will even be allowed entry there, Yumu continued. All Buddhas Conference, Yi Futian murmured. All the great Buddhas of Western Heaven would gather in one place. And indeed, it might be difficult for him to get in. How did Donghuang the Great get to meet the Lord of all Buddhas back then? Yi Futian asked suddenly. When Yumu thought about that, he couldn't help but show a solemn look on his face. It was as if he was still awed by the memories of it all these years later. He said, Donghuang the Great went to All Buddhas Conference to discuss the teachings of Buddhism and outshone all of the Buddhas. Chapter 2471. Imitating Donghuang. Chapter 2471. Imitating Donghuang. Yi Futian felt a little disquieted inside when he heard what Yumu said. Since his arrival to the world of Buddhism, the name of Donghuang the Great was often mentioned. This legendary figure, a genius of heavenly might, was a youngster compared to the Lord of all Buddhas. However, he had now stepped into the imperial realm and ruled over all of the divine prefecture. Donghuang the Great once visited the world of Buddhism, defeated all the Buddhas who were in attendance, and was favored by the Lord of all Buddhas, who had passed one of the 6 superpowers of Buddhism onto him. What a magnificent sight it must have been for Yumu to be transported to that time in awe at the mere memory of the event. When he spoke of Donghuang the Great, his eyes were full of longing. It was as if he wanted to be transported back to that era and relive the exceptional undertaking of Donghuang the Great. Although Yi Futian and Donghuang the Great were on opposing sides and each had their own stance, Yi Futian greatly admired the capabilities of Donghuang the Great, whose legendary deeds were breathtaking. If he was destined to be on the opposing side of Donghuang the Great, what a terrible fate would that be? Even his own talent was unparalleled. Yi Futian could vaguely sense a powerful oppressive force when he thought of Donghuang the Great. It was an elusive sense of suffocation. Could someone, such as the Emperor of Divine Prefecture, be truly swayed? Forcing himself to abandon these wayward thoughts, Yi Futian returned to reality once again, as he looked at Yumu saying, All the great Buddhas will be attending All Buddhas Conference to discuss teachings and methods of Buddhism. Can outsiders attend as well? All Buddhas Conference, held at Spirit Mountain of Western Heaven, was the grandest of all Buddhist events that would be taking place during the All Buddhas Fest. There is no hard and fast rule that says you can't. Hundreds of years ago, Donghuang the Great himself had participated in the All Buddhas Conference to discuss Buddhism. However, Benefactor Yi may encounter greater difficulties in attending the conference this time. After all, many people here are hostile as far as Benefactor Yi is concerned, Yumu replied. He seemed to have guessed what Yi Futian was thinking. I understand. Yi Futian nodded. When those cultivators left previously, they had already told him threateningly that he couldn't meet the Lord of all Buddhas. However, without seeing the Lord of all Buddhas, the matter regarding Hua Qingqing could not be resolved, meaning that they would have failed to accomplish the goal of this trip. He already had several life and death experiences during this trip to the Western world of Buddhism, which proved valuable. But he had also suffered heavy losses. The divine body of Xinjia the Great Emperor was destroyed, and what was gained by the experience he had was far less than the damages that were caused by the loss of the divine body. Now that all Buddha's conference was upon them, they had to give it a go, no matter what. Even if they failed, at least they tried. For him, the rule that no blood could be shed during all Buddha's fest was significant protection that could be used to his advantage. He believed that no one would dare violate the one cardinal rule of all Buddha's fest on such a grand occasion, where even the Lord of all Buddhas himself might appear. I heard that on the sacred land of Western Heaven, there are Buddhist scriptures hidden in ancient temples and the like, and none of them are guarded against outsiders. Those who wish may come and go as they please to observe and comprehend these scriptures. Am I right? Yi Futian asked Yimu. Yimu glanced at him, nodded and said, "Yes, Buddhism imparts Buddhist teachings. The sacred land of Western Heaven is the holy land of Buddhism. Naturally, it is the first to make those teachings available to all. These Buddhist scriptures are copied by major ancient temples, so that anyone who comes to the sacred land of Western Heaven to cultivate may have access to them. Of course, those who could come to the sacred land of Western Heaven were themselves extraordinary figures already. They were cultivators of advanced and profound realms. These people were all figures in the top echelon of the Western world, and it was very significant for these people to preach Buddhism to them. Furthermore, besides the secret methods of Buddhism and other rare superpowers, most of the scriptures of Buddhism can be found in the ancient temples of Western Heaven." Yimu continued. Benefactor Yi meant to follow in the steps of Donghuang the Great, comprehend Buddhist methods, and use them to participate in the All Buddhas Conference, to compete with other Buddhas? Does the Grand Master think it possible? Yi Futian did not deny that at the moment, this seemed to be the only route he could take. It is hard. Yimu's eyes appeared thoughtful. He said, "Little monk, I know that Benefactor Yi is talented above all others, but time is pressing. Benefactor Yi has never been in contact with Buddhist methods before, and it is only dozens of days away from the All Buddhas Conference. If Benefactor Yi meant to comprehend Buddhism in order to compete in discussion with other Buddhas, it will not be an easy task, and that is putting it mildly. Donghuang the Great had done it once. But how many Donghuang the Greats were out there in this world? For thousands of years, there had been no one who could be compared with Donghuang the Great. Several other great emperors were almighty existences before the time of Donghuang the Great. No matter how difficult it might be, it doesn't hurt to try," said Yi Futian. Yimu nodded and said, "Benefactor Yi is right on that front, of course. Hundreds of years ago, Donghuang the Great defeated all the Buddhas by the method of Buddhism. Today layman Yi, who also came from the divine prefecture, would like to repeat history. For this little monk, I am very curious to see. In the days that follow, I would make sure no one will disturb Benefactor Ye's cultivation in Buddhism." Tianyin Arhat's voice came from the distance as he continued, "Yimu, guard Benefactor Yi well, and don't let anyone disturb his cultivation." Yimu pondered for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. I wouldn't dare trouble the Grand Master to such extent." Yi Futian said, "The Buddha Lord has already come forward to intervene on my behalf once in person. I'm sure no one will come and make trouble. All Buddha's conference is coming soon. I'm sure the Grand Master must have a lot of things to do before that. Please don't trouble yourselves on my account." Yimu was a disciple of Wutian Buddha Lord, so his title ought to be somewhere close to an arhat. Even though he had been more than polite and humble in Yi Futian's presence, he was undoubtedly a great Buddha himself, with lofty status in the Buddhist sect. To trouble others for his own protection was not something Yi Futian felt he was entitled to, nor did he wish to bother the others unnecessarily. "It's no trouble. I am taking this opportunity to review some of the Buddhist methods. For little monk, this is also cultivation, Yumu replied. If the Grand Master insists, I will have no mind to concentrate on my studying of Buddhism. Even if the other man had expressed his willingness, in good conscience, Yi Futian couldn't very well delay others in what they had to do. Seeing that Yi Futian was persistent on this point, Yumu didn't force the issue. Instead, he said, since Benefactor Yi said so, little monk will not disturb Benefactor Yi's study of Buddhism. However, if there are unforeseen incidents taking place here, little monk will come and handle them. Right now, when all Buddha's fest is happening, there should be no one in all of the sacred land of the Western Heaven will disturb Benefactor Yi. Yi Futian nodded and bowed to Yumu with his hands clasped. Thank you, Grand Master. Likewise, Yumu put his hands together and replied, then little monk will take my leave now. Safe travel, Grand Master. Yi Futian responded and saw Yumu stepping forward. However, after just a few steps, the other man's figure disappeared without a trace. It was as if he had never been there before. Even Yi Futian could feel a fluctuation of power originated from the great path of space. Yi Futian was quite amazed by what he saw. Was this Buddha's celerity? Indeed, the 6 superpowers of Buddhism were endlessly wondrous. After Yumu left, Chunyi asked Yi Futian, do you really mean to cultivate in Buddhist methods? Is there a problem with that? Yi Futian asked Chunyi instead. Chunyi shook his head. It's just that with only a few dozen days left, will that be enough time? The methods of Buddhism may be different from all the methods they had cultivated before. The more advanced the Buddhist methods, the more difficult it was to cultivate. For Yi Futian to cultivate these methods in a limited period of time was something short of a tall order, with high levels of difficulties, as he had to compete with other Buddhas using Buddhist methods. Never mind that those figures of Buddhas or arhats were enchanting genius talents themselves. Even those many disciples of Buddhism were impressive and striking figures. It was equivalent to the top geniuses in divine prefecture, all gathering together in one place. The great paths are connected, and I am not so slow in my cultivation, Yi Futian responded. However, he saw that Chunyi didn't quite believe it. Of course, even Yi Futian himself knew just how complicated this matter was. After all, he would be facing the topmost group of people in all of the Western world of Buddhism. However, the road that Donghuang the Great had walked once, he must now travel on it as well, no matter what. When you cultivate Buddhist methods, I can be by your side. Perhaps it will be of some help to you, Hua Qingqing said, which surprised Chunyi to no end. Was this possible? Chunyi stole a glance at Hua Jiyu, whose expression did not change one bit. At this time, Chunyi couldn't help but admire Yi Futian's ability. Very well. Yi Futian nodded, and the admiration in Chunyi's eyes turned into worship. Yi Futian had no idea of the thoughts that went through Chunyi's mind. Hua Qingqing's words didn't mean anything else. Only Yi Futian knew how special she was. This was the reason why they came to the sacred land of Western Heaven in the first place. Let's go, Yi Futian said as he started moving forward. I'll pick a place, Hua Qingqing said. Yi Futian looked at her and agreed. Good. With that said, Hua Qingqing went first, and everyone else followed behind her. It didn't take long for the group of them to come to an ordinary temple. Very few people entered, but Hua Qingqing stepped right into it. Yi Futian accompanied her. After entering the temple, they found its library. In the library, there were rows upon rows of bookshelves on which were all the scriptures cast in jade slips. The bookshelves were engraved with words clearly denoting their categories. Hua Qingqing took out a volume from a specific place on the shelf and handed it to Yi Futian. Yi Futian took the scripture and looked at it. This sutra was none other than one of the Buddhist basics, the Heart Sutra. Not only that, but the scriptures here all seem to be basic Buddhist scriptures, not some high-level cultivational method, nor had they seen any scriptures about powerful Buddhist superpowers. However, Hua Qingqing brought him here first and handed him a volume of Heart Sutra. Yi Futian knew that Hua Qingqing had some prior exposure to Buddhism, although that was when she was in the lower worlds. If you can thoroughly understand the important scriptures here, then when you cultivate methods of Buddhism, you will get twice the result with half the effort, Hua Qingqing said to Yi Futian, and Yi Futian agreed. As his divine consciousness pried into the scriptures, all of a sudden, the words floated in his mind. They were the content of the scriptures. At the same time, Hua Qingqing, who was beside him, closed her eyes, and there was a mysterious force gushing out of her. Her soft lips seemed to be moving. A strange sound of Buddha seeped into Yi Futian's ears, and instantly Yi Futian entered into a state of selflessness. At that moment, it was like he had entered the heart of Buddhism, which was an amazing feeling. Chapter 2472, Cultivation in Buddhism. Chapter 2472, Cultivation in Buddhism. Although the Heart Sutra was considered an introductory study of Buddhism, it was also a classic sacred text of Buddhism, full of infinite wisdom and wonder. Yi Futian deeply immersed himself in it. The content in the Heart Sutra was not much, and it was a little too obscure and dull for beginners. Once he entered into the space of total fascination, Yi Futian seemed to exist in the space of Buddhism. He sat cross-legged and surrounded by Buddhist runes. Faintly, lingering sounds of Buddha could be heard, which was transmitted into the ears of those who could hear it, and it was deafening and unmistakable. A Buddha lamp was lit next to him, which seemed to also light up the heart for Buddha inside of him. Yi Futian almost felt that he had always been a Buddhist cultivator, and was now comprehending Buddhist scriptures. As time passed, Yi Futian was surrounded by the light of Buddha. It was as if he had been covered with a layer of gold all over his body. The white garment on him faintly glowed with a golden radiance. Others were also leafing through these Buddhist scriptures next to them, but they were browsing. Even if no cultivation was involved, reading these Buddhist scriptures and meditating on them was beneficial. Yi Futian stayed here for about a month before leaving. Soon after, Hua Qingqing took him to other ancient temples to study and comprehend Buddhist scriptures that were there and cultivate Buddhist superpowers. After coming to the sacred land of Western Heaven, Yi Futian was immersed in the cultivation of Buddhism. In a blink of an eye, 2 months passed. Yi Futian had been wandering among the ancient temples during this time. The time he stayed in each location became shorter and shorter. Recently, it seemed that he was simply observing, then leaving right after. It was more like taking a tour of the place, rather than cultivating. In the meantime, at the sacred land of Western Heaven, the atmosphere of all Buddha's fest was hitting a high point. The entire Western Heaven was more festive and lively than ever. There were already many people who were talking about the upcoming All Buddhas conference. It was rumored that some great Buddhas had already arrived on the spirit mountains of all the heavens in the world of Buddhism, and they had stepped into the sacred land of Western Heavens. Some even claimed they had seen those figures with their own eyes. At this time, in a place of Buddhist cultivation in the Western Heaven, the light of Buddha surrounds this space, full of peace and joy. In one place, there was an eminent monk who was giving a lecture. Many Buddhist cultivators sat and listened quietly, their visage majestic and dignified. The light of Buddha lingered all around them, as if they were preparing for the coming of the All Buddhas conference. When the lecture was over, the phantom of those Buddhas in front gradually disappeared. The light of Buddha still circulated in the quiet space upon those Buddhist cultivators. After a while, they opened their eyes and recited the Buddha's name and thanks. "How does everyone feel?" a cultivator asked with a smile. Buddha Lord's preaching was enlightening and refreshing. "The benefits are incredible," someone replied. "The Buddha Lord has an advanced and profound understanding of Buddhism and has elucidated some of my questions about the scriptures. I feel that my cultivation has improved a few more degrees because of it," another jumped in. "Arhat's cultivation has already reached the pinnacle, and now that your comprehension has improved even more, you must be getting close to crossing the Buddha's tribulation. This time at All Buddha's conference, you will outshine all the others." Everyone was talking and praising the man, who was none other than Shunyan Arhat. "What has that Yi Futian been doing? Is he still reading the scriptures?" Shunyan Arhat asked around. In the sacred land of Western Heaven, Yi Futian's every move could not be hidden from their eyes. The top-rated Buddha's clairvoyance could see through the endless space, and in the land of Western Heaven, they could directly zoom in on Yi Futian's location and what he was doing. Therefore, Yi Futian's cultivation in Buddhism did not escape their attention. Of course, Yi Futian never thought of concealing his whereabouts or what he was doing. He knew that his every move was under the scrutiny of these Buddhist cultivators. Tianyin Arhat, for one, had been watching him from the shadows. He heard everything loud and clear when Yi Futian was chatting with Yimu before. Well, he has been wandering among the ancient temples of the Western Heaven, and no one has any idea as to his true intentions, someone else responded. If you are speaking of cultivating Buddhism, going into a temple for a day or two then walking out of it is not the way to comprehend Buddhism. Some other cultivators gave their 2 cents with a smile. His smile was tinged with a slight sense of sarcasm. It seemed he was amused by Yi Futian's lack of self-awareness. Cultivation of Buddhism must avoid impatience. Although Yi Futian is talented, he has too high of a regard for himself. Perhaps he is eager to achieve success and wants to improve his realm by comprehending and cultivating in Buddhism. However, he is just wasting his time. What if he could really comprehend Buddhism, receiving some enlightenment, and cultivated some Buddhism methods? What is his intention? Someone asked, a little curious. He wants to follow the example of Donghuang the Great, participate in the All Buddhas Conference and defeat everyone there. A Buddhist cultivator replied with a smile, and everyone suddenly burst out laughing. The whole thing looked a little comical. There was a strong sense of mockery. To defeat all the Buddhas? The golden eyes of Shinyan Arhat shot out some terrifying sharp rays. If he comes to the All Buddhas Conference and asks to participate, whatever happens after that cannot be blamed on us. Yi Futian had not yet answered for the killings of their disciples, and now he wanted to participate in the All Buddhas Conference to defeat all the Buddhas. If this was not a crazy man's talk, what else could it be? The All Buddhas Conference was a major Buddhist event. What happened hundreds of years ago, when Donghuang the Great visited, was not known to too many people. Only some ancient Buddhas who had cultivated for many years knew exactly what happened once upon a time. But in their generation, and at this time, they would absolutely not allow a similar occurrence again in the Buddhist sect. After Donghuang the Great became emperor, what happened here was discussed in a positive light in the land of divine prefecture, and was discussed ad nauseam. However, in the eyes of these Buddhists, their major event was crashed by some outsider, who then defeated all the Buddhas at their methods was certainly not viewed in a positive light. Especially those Buddhist cultivators, who were defeated by Donghuang the Great, must have had a difficult time swallowing their defeats. It was said that some great Buddhas had been in retreat ever since. They had been heavily affected by the event that took place hundreds of years ago, and had not yet fully recovered from it. They seemed determined not to come out of their retreat until they had proved the great path. There was even a great Buddha whose existence ended in parinirvana because of what took place. In any case, this matter, within the Buddhist circle, it was definitely a dishonor. Of course, there were some top Buddhas who did not mind it. From their perspective, all beings were equal, and for that, they admired Donghuang the Great. This was because their philosophy in cultivating Buddhism was different from the rest. However, Yi Futian didn't know the things that were happening there. He continued to immerse in his own cultivation of Buddhist teachings and methods. Before they knew it, there was only 7 days' time left before the start of the All Buddhas Conference. Yi Futian stopped his comprehension of Buddhism and did not continue to cultivate in the ancient temple. At this moment, Yi Futian and his group were here, on top of a peak in the Western Heaven. Next to the cliff, one could survey the vast space of the Western Heaven below. Yi Futian sat with his legs crossed, surrounded by golden light. Now it was no longer just a simple light of Buddha. His body seemed to have turned into a golden body. He was radiant all over. It was as if it was the body of an ancient golden Buddha. With this transformation, he was surrounded by many Buddhist runes, while sounds of Buddha lingered in the air. In Yi Futian's life palace, the entire life palace was surrounded by golden light of Buddha, as if it had been transformed into a Buddha's world. Chapter 2473, Golden Coastal Region. Chapter 2473, Golden Coastal Region. Yi Futian opened his eyes. The golden light of Buddha gleamed around him. Faintly, there seemed to be sounds of Buddha lingering between heaven and earth, solemn and holy. The cultivation methods of Buddhism were indeed exceptional. It calms one's body and soul, elevating one's overall state of mind, Yi Futian whispered. Hua Jiyu and Hua Qingqing walked up behind him. Hua Jiyu smiled and said, "That's because all the Buddhist scriptures that Qingqing has been chosen for you are superior, making this effect possible." "It's not so," Hua Qingqing said softly. "In Buddhism, there was no such thing as superior or inferior among scriptures, as it is dependent on the person who seeks the enlightenment. However, the Buddhist scriptures I have chosen are in ascending order, which is indeed beneficial to the state of mind. But what truly matters is the cultivator himself." Obviously, Hua Qingqing was complimenting Yi Futian. "Speaking of which, if it were not for your help, Qingqing, I would not have been able to enter into such state of cultivation so quickly. I think not just me, but anyone with you assisting in the cultivation of Buddhism would be able to accomplish amazing results," Yi Futian concluded with a sigh. During this period of cultivation, Hua Qingqing's effect on him was as if she lit up his desire for Buddhism. He was already gifted with extraordinary talent, and because of the existence of his natal spirit, it was not difficult for him to cultivate any method of the Great Path. Now, with Hua Qingqing's help, it seemed that he was naturally suited for Buddhist cultivation. He was in perfect sync with it, and was able to enter the state of Buddhist cultivation immediately. "You two can stop praising each other." Hua Jiyu smiled softly. "Although the cultivation of Buddhism is going smoothly, to participate in the All Buddhas Conference, you have to face many top-level great Buddhas in the Western world of Buddhism. Many of them are hostile towards you, including the Arhats." When she spoke of this, Hua Jiyu was not so optimistic anymore. Just as she said, she had absolute confidence in Yi Futian's cultivation. Although it had not been long since he cultivated Buddhism, he had already had astounding successes. Still, it all depended on what kind of opponents he would be facing. However, the All Buddhas Conference was a forum for Buddhist cultivation. If Yi Futian intruded into the conference by any other means, it would be seriously out of place and defied the original intent of the All Buddhas Conference. If there were one great Buddha who had experienced the divine tribulation of the Great Path among those Buddhist cultivators, Yi Futian would be hard-pressed to contend with that. "I understand," Yi Futian nodded. Even though he felt some pressure, Yi Futian was trying to maintain a balanced mindset, which perhaps was related to his recent cultivation. He looked at Hua Qingqing and said, "If we fail this time, we will have to find another way. We are just fighting for a chance this time. In fact, everything that happens in the sacred land of the Western Heaven must not be hidden from the Lord of all Buddhas. As long as he wants, everything will be known to him. Even if we fail, if the Lord of all Buddhas wants to receive me, he will. If he doesn't want to receive me, then he won't." Hua Qingqing seemed extremely at peace as she spoke casually. Although she did not possess a high level of cultivation, her mentality revealed extreme serenity. She was at ease with everything that was happening at the moment. Yi Futian nodded. Hua Qingqing's words were quite right. Buddhism had 6 superpowers and many other fascinating and amazing methods, the wonders of which were infinite. The Lord of all Buddhas cultivated all the methods of Buddhism, so how could he not know all that was happening in the sacred land of Western Heaven? At this time, there were footsteps behind them. It was Blind Tai who came over and said to Yi Futian, "There are only a few days left before the All Buddhas Conference, and the cultivators of the Western Heaven have gathered in one direction. Those Buddhist cultivators have also gone there, preparing to go to the Spirit Mountain of the Western Heaven. Shouldn't we be getting ready to go as well?" "Yes," Yi Futian nodded and said, "It is time to take off." After that, he contacted Mo Yunzi with his mind. Soon, Mo Yunzi arrived with Feng Siyuan and the others. He turned into his original form. Yi Futian and his group walked onto the back of the Golden Wing Rock. The rock's wings spread wide, breaking through the sky, rushing forward. At this moment, in the sky above the Western Heaven, there were cultivators everywhere traveling by air. Many of them were Buddhist cultivators, surrounded by the light of Buddha. Yi Futian looked around to take in the sight. Countless many cultivators were in the air, and all of them were heading in the same direction. To the west of the Western Heaven, there was a golden coastal region. This area was said to be endowed with spirit, and only those who cultivated Buddhism may cross. Common cultivators, without exception, had no way to cross this sea. Therefore, this coastal region was also known as the Sea of Buddha. At this time, countless cultivators gathered in front of this golden coastal region. Their eyes looked far ahead, where the other end of the sea seemed to be connected with the sky. There, one could vaguely see the golden light of Buddha above the firmament, radiant beyond words, as if it was a world of Buddhism outside of this world. Everyone knew that was where Spirit Mountain of Western Heaven was located. Lord of all Buddhas had once cultivated there, and to this day, the Spirit Mountain of the Western Heaven was still considered the cultivation court of the Lord of all Buddhas. Of course, the Lord of all Buddhas had long since transcended the earthly world, and was no longer bound by the 5 elements of heaven and earth. Now it was most other Buddhas who cultivated at the Spirit Mountain. All those Buddhist cultivators clasped their hands in front of them, appearing exceedingly pious. They then stepped into the sea and traveled by Buddhist boats, dazzling with the light of Buddha, as if on a pilgrimage. Their entire bodies were submerged in the light of Buddha. As time progressed, many figures could be discerned in this golden sea, scattered in different places in the sea, but all were moving in the same direction. The scene was incredibly spectacular. Who knows when little monks like us will have the opportunity to participate in the All Buddhas Conference. Some Buddhist cultivators with a lower level of cultivation sighed and wondered. His eyes, which focused on the golden sea, were filled with endless yearning. He put his hands together and gestured towards the far distance as if in prayer. In the crowd, many cultivators were doing the same thing he was. That's a Buddhist cultivator under the tutelage of Tongchan Buddha Lord. Someone looked in a particular direction. Tongchan Arhut is also there, someone else added, looking at a wickedly handsome Buddhist cultivator. This group of cultivators stepped into the sea and moved forward. More and more great Buddhas were coming, but they moved forward in the same way, without any exception. This was the only way to reach the Spirit Mountain, as there were no other shortcuts. Even those top Buddha lords had to cross the sea in order to get there. As the time of the All Buddhas Conference drew closer, the number of people in this coastal region gradually decreased. Most of them had already gone to Spirit Mountain in advance, not wanting to miss the grand occasion of the All Buddhas Conference. When Futian and the others arrived, there were not so many people who were crossing the sea anymore. They walked to the very front of the coastal region, looking at the light of Buddha that was sprinkling down from the sky in the distance. The end of the sea seemed to be part of the sky, the ultimate holy land for those who cultivated Buddhism, Spirit Mountain of Western Heaven. However, Futian did not set off immediately but was waiting. When all the Buddhist cultivators were gone, he would then cross the sea. Chapter 2474. Buddhas at Spirit Mountain. Chapter 2474. Buddhas at Spirit Mountain. As time went by, fewer and fewer people were crossing the Golden Sea. All Buddhas Fest had entered its last month, and the All Buddhas Conference would be held on the Spirit Mountain of Western Heaven. With no more Buddhist cultivators to cross over the Golden Sea, many cultivators held lotuses in their hands and placed them into the Golden Sea. Suddenly, those lotus blossoms seemed to be effused with a golden glow, drifting towards the center of the sea, as if they were transforming into golden lotus flowers. Countless others repeated this same action. Soon, those who had released the lotus flowers clasped their hands together in front of them, worshipping the golden sea with their eyes closed. The sound of Buddha came out of their mouths. These tremendously pious folks seemed to be praying for blessings. The sound of Buddha reverberated throughout heaven and earth, as if forming a resonance in this corner of the world. Futian stood in front of the coast. With the sound of Buddha in his ears, he was compelled to clasp his hands together as well. His expression was one of great solemnity. Nowadays he considered himself one of the Buddhist cultivators. In their own ways, these cultivators of Buddhism seemed to pray for the success of the All Buddhas Conference. And something seemed to respond to this sound of Buddha, which lingered between heaven and earth. At the end of the Golden Sea, where it bordered the sky, the infinitely dazzling light of Buddha lit up, then sprinkled over the sea. The light covered this boundless coastal region with an even brighter golden glow. Even a sound of Buddha came from yonder, which created some kind of resonance with the sound of Buddha on this side. Suddenly, many Buddhist cultivators who were unable to cross the sea sat cross-legged by the sea and cultivated there with their eyes closed. The sight in front of them was so spectacular and palpable that Qin Yi, Fang Xiyuan, and the others felt its solemnity and holiness as well. They couldn't help but bow, with their hands clasped in front of them, to the other end of the sea. Conceivably, this light of Buddha must be a sign signifying the start of the All Buddhas Conference. Long afterward, the sound of Buddha that lingered between heaven and earth gradually dissipated, but the light of Buddha remained. It continued to illuminate the world. Gradually, some left, while others still sat by the edge of the sea to cultivate. The coastal region with so many people cultivating was in fact strangely quiet. "When are you leaving?" Chen Yi walked next to Yi Futian and asked. Yi Futian glanced into the distance and whispered, "It's about time." As he was speaking, he looked at Hua Qingqing beside him and said, "Qingqing, are you ready?" "Yes," Hua Qingqing nodded. Her face was very tranquil, and her beautiful eyes were clear and pure. "Let's go then," Yi Futian said with a smile. His heart was without disturbance. Hua Jiyu stood on the other side and whispered, "You too, be careful." "I know." Yi Futian smiled at Hua Jiyu, knowing that she was still a little nervous. Only Hua Qingqing, and he would embark on this journey. Hua Jiyu and the others did not cultivate Buddhism. Therefore, they could not cross the sea. Yi Futian and Hua Qingqing stepped into the golden water, and a Buddha boat appeared at their feet, drifting forward and carried them into the golden sea. "Master!" Little Ling, Fang Xiyuan, and the others stepped forward and looked towards the departing figure of Yi Futian. They were all a little unsure. On this trip, their master was about to go to the spirit mountain of Western Heaven, where all the Buddhas would be gathering. Among these Buddhas, there was no telling how many strong cultivators there would be. If they wanted to kill Yi Futian, he would have no way of fighting back. Yi Futian waved his hand with his back towards them. He then sat cross-legged on the Buddha boat, as a light of Buddha illuminated upon him. It was as if he had been incarnated into a Buddha himself. Hua Qingqing stood behind him with a small smile on her face, as she looked at the far end of the sea. Her garments likewise were bathed in the light of Buddha. With her hands clasped together, her visage was one of solemn majesty. It was like that of a bodhisattva. All the countless people in front of the sea regarded that lonely Buddha boat in front of them with surprise. The sight before them was as perfect as a painting. Were these two on their way to the spirit mountain of Western Heaven? The two of them floated on the sea in the Buddha boat, moving forward. The Buddha sea was like a golden mirror. When Yi Futian looked down at his reflection in the sea, he did not know whether he was traveling in the water or that he was walking in the sky. Yi Futian smiled, then closed his eyes, cultivating quietly. He was allowing the Buddha boat to float forward without distraction or worry. Hua Qingqing stood there quietly, as if she was in charge of the advancement of the boat. Bathed in the light of Buddha, she appeared sacred and beautiful. The Buddha boat moved forward slowly, and it seemed to be very far away from the other end of the sea. They had no idea when they would ever arrive. Day by day, the time went by. In a blink of an eye, more than 20 days had passed. The Buddha boat was still floating in the golden sea, easily losing the passage of time. Hua Qingqing and Yi Futian did not exchange one word. They were extremely quiet. The end of Western Heaven is still far away, but they did not feel the least bit of impatience. This was the Buddha Sea, and the Buddha Sea had cognizance of its own. When they were allowed to cross over, they would arrive. If the Buddha Sea did not want them to cross, they would not get there no matter how much they forced it. This here was the Buddha's world. As they were still drifting, Yi Futian continued to cultivate quietly and comprehend the Buddhist methods. Hua Qingqing likewise stood there quietly, without disturbing Yi Futian's cultivation. After some time had passed, the All Buddhas Conference had been progressing for more than 20 days at this point, with only the last 3 days remaining. Hua Qingqing realized that they were still on the sea, and the distance to Spirit Mountain at the end of the sea had not changed at all. It was as if they would never reach their destination. However, at this moment, There was a sudden surge of the light of Buddha that rippled over the sea, and the golden surface of the sea was suddenly tossed with waves. Then, several figures of Buddha floated up from the golden sea, standing in front of them. Their hands were clasped together in front of them, and the sound of Buddha came out of their mouths. Amitabha. Likewise, Hua Qingqing put her hands together and bowed to salute the Buddhas who were present. Finally, Yi Futian stopped cultivating as he opened his eyes, clasping his hands in front of him, and saluted. Youngster Yi Futian comes to visit the spirit mountain of the Western Heaven. You two benefactors are both endowed with roots of wisdom, another Buddha said. Then among them, the water mist surged from the golden sea, turning into a golden door, which illuminated another world inside, as if it was the grand view of the spirit mountain. Thank you, Grand Master. Yi Futian bowed again to thank them. Then, the Buddha boat continued moving forward and drifting towards the door. Soon, the Buddha boat went through the door and drove inside. In the next moment it disappeared. When they disappeared, the door disappeared immediately as well. All the phantoms of the Buddhas turned into a watery mist and returned to the sea. Everything was as it was before, as if nothing had ever happened. However, in another place, when Yi Futian and Hua Qingqing reappeared once again, there was no more Buddha boat under them. They were standing on pure soil now. Looking forward, they saw a sky full of Buddhas as the light of Buddha shone upon them. From bottom to top, many Buddhas could be seen standing in this space. When they beheld the sight before them, Yi Futian and Hua Qingqing were both very solemn. They put their hands together and greeted all the Buddhas in the sky, appearing extremely pious. The Buddhas seemed to know that they were coming, and they seemed to be waiting for them. Countless eyes fell on the two of them. Under the brilliance of the light of Buddha, both Yi Futian and Hua Qingqing felt an invisible sense of pressure. This was not deliberate, however. Whoever faced so many Buddhas in the sky at once would feel the pressure just like they did. Chapter 2475. Dharma of the Alakanatha Battle Form. Chapter 2475. Dharma of the Alakanatha Battle Form. Yi Futian looked at all the Buddhas in the sky. Although he felt the pressure distinctly, he would still face it with the utmost tranquility. In Spirit Mountain of Western Heaven, all the Buddhas in the sky, from the bottom up, were organized with an obvious hierarchy. Those Buddhas with stronger cultivation were sitting in higher places. It seemed that there were several layers of heavens. This was something that Yi Futian took notice of. Everything in the world had its own order. The same held true for even the Buddhas. Yi Futian, you had killed disciples of Buddhism. How dare you show your face in Spirit Mountain of Western Heaven? There was a voice that came from above, chastising him. A pressure of might now spread towards Yi Futian as many eyes fell on him. Many of them were obviously hostile. They never imagined that Yi Futian would dare to come here and step on the ultimate holy land of Western Heaven. Yi Futian looked around at the Buddhas. His expression was calm enough. He asked, "May I ask the Buddhas this? What if someone was trying to take your cultivation, robbing you of your divine items, and threatening your life? What would you do?" No one answered him, but they knew why he asked. Everything that happened previously in Six Desires Heaven was because those cultivators had attempted to take the divine body away from him. I asked the Buddhas humbly, would people who act like this be worthy of being called Buddhas? Yi Futian followed up with yet another question. On the Spirit Mountain of Western Heaven, there was a moment of silence. Then a great Buddha responded, "Not worthy. In that case, I haven't slain any Buddha. These claims are nothing more than baseless, false accusations." Yi Futian clasped his hands together and continued. Yi Futian came here today, seeking an audience with the Lord of all Buddhas. As the Buddhas whispered amongst themselves, many Buddhist cultivators glanced at Hua Qingqing, who stood behind Yi Futian. They could discern that there was something extraordinary about her. However, for Yi Futian to take her here, to see the Lord of all Buddhas, was clearly a bit self-aggrandizing on Yi Futian's part. Of course, they also knew that Yi Futian came here this time because he wanted to emulate Dong Huang. Yi Futian, you came from Divine Prefecture and have only been in the Western Heaven for a few months. For what reason do you think you deserve an audience with the Lord of all Buddhas? A Buddha asked. Some people even jeered in their hearts. This guy had not a clue of his own ability nor its limits. Buddha says that all beings are equal, and there is no distinction of high and low. I am here sincerely asking for an audience. Why is that forbidden? Yi Futian asked in return. All beings are equal, and there is no distinction between high and low. However, there is a distinction between high and low in Buddhist methods, someone replied. Yi Futian, the All Buddhas Conference is a time when all Buddhists gather to study the methods with each other. We know that you meant to emulate the feat of Donghuang the Great, but you have only cultivated in Buddhist methods for mere months. It's still a long way away from when you can compete using Buddhist methods. Furthermore, even if you are outstanding in Buddhist methods, it is no guarantee whether the Lord of all Buddhas wishes to grant you an audience. All beings are indeed equal. It is precisely because of this that all beings have no obligation to agree to any demands from the others. Yi Futian nodded slightly and said, I understand it is completely up to the Lord of all Buddhas to decide whether he will receive me or not. Although I have only cultivated Buddhist methods for a short time, I know that the cultivation does not lie in the length of time. I have no intention to follow in the footsteps of Donghuang the Great. I am only here because I desire an audience with the Lord of all Buddhas. Since this is the only opportunity available to me, that is why I am here. As he was speaking, he took a few steps forward and said, Therefore, Yi Futian would like to exchange Buddhist methods with the Buddhas who are in attendance. Please advise. He put his hands together once again and bowed to salute them. He appeared to be very respectful. However, he was neither obsequious nor arrogant when facing all these Buddhas in the sky. He was extremely calm and confident. Upon the Spirit Mountain, Buddha's peaceful and benevolent light covered this space, making it more holy than ever. The Buddhas looked at the man with white hair, and they were a little curious. Hundreds of years ago, another cultivator came from Divine Prefecture to exchange with the Buddhas. What would be the difference between this one and Donghuang the Great from once upon a time? Since Benefactor Yi wants to have an exchange in Buddhist methods, who is willing to give it a try? Said a great Buddha at the highest place of Spirit Mountain, clearly granting Yi Futian's request. Yi Futian looked over there and saw that the speaker was none other than Wuxian Buddha Lord himself, and he felt a little relieved. His uninvited presence at Spirit Mountain of Western Heaven was truly a bit disrespectful. The worst-case scenario was he being forcibly driven out of Spirit Mountain. If that happened, it would definitely be impossible for him to see the Lord of all Buddhas. The words of Wuxian Buddha Lord, no doubt, gave him a fighting chance. All the Buddhas in the sky fixed their eyes on Yi Futian. They could perceive Yi Futian's cultivation at the peak of Runhuang in the 8th realm, and they had long heard of Yi Futian's combat effectiveness. When he was in the original realm, they had already heard that Yi Futian was an invincible existence in the Runhuang realm. With the help of the divine body, he could punish even those who had survived the divine tribulation of the Great Path. Of course, Yi Futian couldn't leverage the divine body or any other objects at present. He had only the option to fight using Buddhist methods. And Yi Futian had only cultivated the Buddhist methods for a few months. It was in this context that the Buddhas had taken Yi Futian's cultivation into consideration. At this moment a Buddha came forward. His entire body was brilliant and massive. It was as if cast from pure gold. His cultivation was exceptional, Buddhist Path 9th Realm, which was equivalent to peak Runhuang. This is Giant Spirit Buddha, Wuxian Buddha Lord introduced. Giant Spirit Buddha bowed with his hands together in front of him, and said to Yi Futian, Benefactor Yi, pleased to meet you. Yi Futian looked at Giant Spirit Buddha, who was several heads taller than himself. His hands clasped in front of him, and he was surrounded by golden light. He sat down cross-legged and said, There is a mention in Buddhist scriptures that as long as the Buddha's heart is determined and faithful, it cannot be shaken, and that Akalanatha battle form could be achieved. Is that correct? It seems that Benefactor Yi has indeed paid attention in the cultivation of Buddhist methods. Praised the Giant Spirit Buddha. If so, please go ahead. When Yi Futian finished speaking, he, who was sitting cross-legged, closed his eyes. His heart was as steady and indestructible a rock. His entire body was shining with golden divine light, and a humongous Buddha statue appeared now, turning into the Dharma of Akalanatha battle form. Both of its hands were held in different positions. It was as if his thoughts had been proven, and had turned him into a Buddha. This sight truly astonished the many Buddhas on the Spirit Mountain, and the giant Spirit Buddha was no exception. However, his body began to expand and enlarge. It turned into a Buddha, which was about the same size as the Alakanatha battle form, but even more stalwart and full of power. The expanded version of giant Spirit Buddha was holding a Vajra pestle radiated with the light of Buddha. He picked it up overhead with both his hands and smashed directly towards the Alakanatha Buddha form. However, Futian remained motionless, his eyes closed. His inaction caused many people to sweat for him. When the Vajra pestle blasted down, a violent roar was heard, and the Alakanatha battle form shook because of it. But its golden torso did not suffer the slightest crack, and it remained as immovable as a mountain, true to the meaning of indestructibility. The golden light of Buddha circulated above the Dharma of the Akalanatha battle form. It was as if many Buddhist runes were floating around, making him a true incarnation of the Buddha. When he saw this, the giant Spirit Buddha knew that he had lost. He put down the Vajra pestle and put his hands together to bow to Futian. Chapter 2476, Buddhist Spell. Chapter 2476, Buddhist Spell. Benefactor Yi has already acquired the essence of Alakanatha battle form. It seems that he accomplished much in these past few months of cultivation. Nobody should underestimate him. A great Buddha commented as he looked at Futian, who was below. The Dharma of Alakanatha battle form was also known as Alakanatha battle form, a very powerful battle form in Buddhism. The cultivation of this battle form was extremely demanding regarding one's state of mind. No one ever suspected that Futian would fully comprehend and cultivate this technique in such a short period. In another direction, many Buddhist cultivators looked at each other. Shinyan Arhat was among these cultivators. Not long ago, they discussed that Futian had only cultivated Buddhism for months and did not stay long in the many places he visited. He would go to some ancient temple for 2 or 3 days before moving on to another one. They did not think this was the way for anyone to cultivate Buddhism properly. But obviously they were wrong. They had underestimated Futian's talent in Buddhism. Not only did he successfully cultivated Buddhist methods, but he had also achieved great things. Although the giant Spirit Buddha was not some major Buddhist figure, he was, after all, an existence in the 9th realm of the Buddhist path. Nevertheless, he was unable to break apart Futian's battle form. The gap between the two was glaring. This demonstrated that Futian's strength was so considerable that unless it were top-level Buddhist cultivators, it would not be easy to repel him. Futian opened his eyes and looked at all the Buddhas. He then walked forward with a solemn expression, hands clasped together in front of him. He maintained a grave and dignified demeanor without being the least impertinent. His lips moved slightly, and sounds of Buddha seemed to come out of his mouth. It was rather difficult to hear what he was saying. Only the lingering sound of Buddha was audible. He walked forward, as if he intended to get to the highest point on a whim. This was to meet the greatest Buddhas of them all, the Lord of all Buddhas. Those great Buddhas felt a sense of déjà vu when they beheld this sight. Hundreds of years ago, Donghuang the Great, like him, walked all the way up to the top and had met the Lord of all Buddhas. Futian likewise was also from the divine prefecture. Bang! Another great Buddha stepped out at this time. This great Buddha was a Buddhist cultivator under Tianluan Vajra Buddha Lord. He had an amazing aura that gave the onlookers a sense of incredible pressure of aggression. When he was standing in front of Futian, a golden Dharma appeared behind him, as a domain suddenly manifested between heaven and earth with Futian in the middle of it. High above the sky, numerous glaring Vajra Buddhas appeared, pressing down with mighty coercion. These glaring Vajras were fierce and frightening with terrifying auras. The Buddha that had walked out also transformed into a Vajra Buddha himself. As he stretched out his golden right arm, suddenly, those glaring Vajras also stretched out their arms, blasting towards Futian at the same time. However, a series of ancient, Golden words continued to pour out of Yi Futian's lips as the sounds of Buddha lingered. That Buddhist cultivator who walked out had a look of caution on his face. This was a Buddhist spell. Did he actually cultivate the Buddhist spell? All around Yi Futian, powerful and domineering Vajras holding the Dharma, spewing out mantras as an unparalleled golden light of Buddha radiated from them. When those many arms blasted down for the kill, they found they could not move him 1 inch. At the same time, with the sound of Buddha that poured out of Yi Futian's mouth, many of those Buddha phantoms in the void began to crack, then they shattered. A Buddhist mantra in the form of runes landed on them, causing their golden body to collapse and pulverize. Aside from those Buddha phantoms, the Buddhist cultivator that had walked out suffered too. Countless runes of Buddhist mantra attached themselves to his golden body and erupted in golden divine light. The light of Buddha was blinding as his golden body exploded. He let out an enraged scream, trying to escape the runes of mantra. However, the runes were endless and infinite, completely shrouding the void. Along with those roaring sounds, the golden body shattered, and that Buddhist cultivator was knocked out. He gave a muffled groan as blood dripped from the corner of his mouth. His golden body was broken, and he was injured. Yi Futian bowed his head and said nothing. He clasped his hands together in front of them and continued moving forward. When that Buddhist cultivator saw Yi Futian coming, he involuntarily backed away to let Yi Futian walk past him. Vajra spell. All the Buddhas looked at Yi Futian in amazement. In addition to the Alakanatha battle form, Yi Futian had also cultivated the Vajra spell, a Buddhist spell. There were many powerful spells in Buddhism that were extremely effective. There were even spells that could transcend the dead and send them into the cycles of reincarnation. The spell Yi Futian used just now was the Vajra spell, which was a particularly domineering type of spell. It was a perfect complement with the Alakanatha battle form, and together, they formed a powerful and unstoppable duo. It was no wonder that the Buddhist cultivator had been unable to stop him from advancing. It was pure coincidence when Yi Futian first cultivated this spell. He had already cultivated the Vajra demon-slaying rhythm previously, which was a rhythm technique of Buddhism. It turned out that Vajra demon-slaying rhythm was derived from the Vajra spell, which was also a part of the spell itself. With an existing foundation and an expert in the way of rhythm, Yi Futian's cultivation of the Vajra spell was a natural choice. He was able to take control of it quickly, and its power was indeed domineering and tyrannical. Afterward, another Buddhist cultivator came out, still someone in the 9th realm, but there was no success. He was crushed by Yi Futian, just like all the others before him. With the Vajra spell on top of the Alakanatha battle form, Yi Futian was solid and unmovable. However, the others could not withstand his attacks. They couldn't even stop his advancement, as he was still walking forward. Seeing that Yi Futian was so impossibly dominant, some Buddhist cultivators stepped forward one after another. Some wanted to stymie Yi Futian's forward progress, and some wanted to experience Yi Futian's strength. But all of them, without exception, were not able to stop him. On both sides, there was a collection of quite a few wounded cultivators. However, Yi Futian was merciful. He didn't go overboard and hurt anyone grievously, as all of them were only slightly injured. After all, this was the spirit mountain of the Western Heaven, the supreme holy land of the world of Buddhism, the place where the Lord of all Buddhas once cultivated. Soon, Yi Futian passed through the lowest layer and stepped up onto the golden sea of clouds. All around him, the auras of these Buddhist cultivators were becoming stronger, as their statuses were also elevated. Just as that great Buddha said before, all beings were equal, and there was no difference among Buddhas. However, there was a distinction between Buddhist methods. From the highest point, those Buddha lords watched Yi Futian, making his way up towards them. Some Buddha lords whispered, "I didn't expect that someone from the divine prefecture, after having cultivated Buddhism for a few months, could reach this level of achievement. It seems that unless the direct disciples of the Buddha lords intervene, it will be difficult to stop benefactor Yi. Could it be that the Buddhas cultivated the methods for many years, and are still not as good as the few months someone spent in cultivation?" Other great Buddhas looked around the crowd and questioned, This great Buddha was none other than Shinyan Buddha Lord, whose speech was as belligerent. His gaze was frightening. Zhu Ho, who was killed in Jinan City, was a disciple of his. Of course, there were many disciples under him, and the death of one was hardly a great matter to him. As someone who was a Buddha Lord, he didn't need to deal with the nitty-gritty of these matters. Nonetheless, it was his disciple who had died, and now the culprit had come here, crashing through the spirit mountain of the western heaven. He was certainly unhappy about this turn of events. If this man were allowed to pass through Spirit Mountain, wouldn't it be a slap in the face for the Buddhas who were here? All the Buddhas cultivated the same methods, but Buddhism was infinite, and the way it was cultivated by each person was different as well. It was the same with figures such as the Buddha Lords. Their ideals and philosophies differed depending on who they were. Upon hearing the words of Shinyan Buddha Lord, one of his disciples immediately came forward. He was still a cultivator in the 9th realm with a terrifying aura of cultivation. He stood in front of Yi Futian, opened up his heavenly eyes, and looked at Yi Futian. It was as if he could see through Yi Futian. Yi Futian raised his head to glance at the other man and thought, a disciple of Shinyan Buddha Lord? Previously, these people had stopped him in the sacred land of the Western Heaven. If they were not on a killing hiatus because of the All Buddhas Fest, perhaps they would be seeking revenge for Zhu Ho by now. Chapter 2477, Mahavarakana. Chapter 2477, Mahavarakana. Ha! The cultivator who came forward was under the tutelage of Shinyan Buddha Lord. He frowned when he used his heavenly eyes to examine Yi Futian. Buddha's clairvoyance was one of the 6 superpowers of Buddhism, infinitely wondrous. Buddha's clairvoyance could see through all things and everything. When cultivated to its ultimate state, it could see into someone's past and future. It was true that Yi Futian had released the Dharma, but his realm was higher than that of Yi Futian's. Using the Buddha's clairvoyance, he should be able to detect all of Yi Futian's weaknesses, unhindered by the Dharma. He would then see through the essence of Yi Futian, thus defeating him using the most effective superpower. However, the Buddha's clairvoyance revealed nothing but primordial chaos. He was unable to see anything clearly, as if in a state of complete nothingness. He even had a suspicious feeling that Yi Futian was like the real Buddha, the purest Buddhist cultivator, whose body was cast in gold. Under the blessing of the Dharma, he was solemn and sacred. This was usually what happened when he looked into other great Buddhas with clairvoyance. Why did this happen when he looked at Yi Futian? He's a little odd. Not only him, but his fellow disciples were all looking at Yi Futian at this time. Golden light of Buddhas shining from their eyes. They used the heavenly eyes to pry and spy. However, even as close as they were, their efforts were equally futile, as they could not properly comprehend his depth. It gave them an illusion that Buddha's clairvoyance had absolutely no effect on Yi Futian. Indeed, perhaps he has divine items or some blessings on him that could resist the prying eyes of Buddha's clairvoyance, the people next to him suggested. If Buddha's clairvoyance was unable to see through Yi Futian, then the only way to deal with Yi Futian was by real combat, which would not be easy, to put it mildly. After all, Yi Futian had demonstrated extraordinary combat effectiveness when he fought before, consistently crushing Buddhist cultivators in the 9th realm. However, the person who came forward was their fellow disciples, cultivating under the same master, Shinyan Buddha Lord. Even if he couldn't pry or see through Yi Futian, his cultivation in Buddhist methods ought to be on equal ground for him to compete with Yi Futian. That Buddhist cultivator's expression sobered up quite a bit now. With a thought, this space suddenly transformed into a realm of Buddhism. Behind him, a Tianyin Buddha appeared. At the same time, countless pairs of eyes appeared in the surrounding space. The sight was a little eerie. Those many eyes looked in Yi Futian's direction simultaneously. When Yi Futian looked at those eyes, countless images appeared in his mind, like illusions. Each pair of eyes contained a different phantasmatic image, which directly took Yi Futian into what seemed to be the world of eye sorcery. Yi Futian found that he seemed to have entered into another world, the space of eye sorcery, the world of the Buddhas. Obviously, he knew this was a false illusion, but somehow, He was still taken there regardless of that knowledge. However, he did not waver. Sounds of Sanskrit came out of his mouth, as the Alakanatha battle form released a brilliant light of Buddha behind him. The light of Buddha surrounded him and expelled all deceptions. Numerous pairs of heavenly eyes were still suspended in the air, but he stood his ground and did not move. All illusions were emptiness. Buzz. At the same time, the golden light of Buddha radiated out of the heavenly eyes which descended upon Futian. Suddenly, Futian felt his body was being restrained. It was difficult for him to move. He couldn't even lift his feet. Buddhist runes continuously flew out of his mouth, flying towards those many pairs of eyes in the void. The Alakanatha battle form released an even more brilliant light of Buddha. Futian remained still. That Buddhist cultivator raised his hand, and a golden divine sword appeared in the hand of the Tianyan Buddha, who was behind him. This sword was blessed by the light of Buddha, and it seemed to be able to cut down all falsehoods and immolate all evil spirits. At the same time, there seemed to be images of Buddhas that reflected in those heavenly eyes. They made the same movement as the Buddha, who slashed down with the divine sword, heaving it into Futian's body. Immobilization technique, Wuxia sword. When all the Buddhist cultivators witnessed the sight, they recognized these two powerful Buddhist superpowers. He had leveraged the heavenly eyes to release the immobilization technique, and Wuxia sword to create a combination so powerful that they could break through all the falsehoods and punish the physical body directly. No evil spirits could stop the attacks from the divine sword. Futian had spent several months comprehending Buddhism in the ancient temples of the Western Heaven. Although it was impossible for him to cultivate all of Buddhism's superpowers, he had some basic understanding of many Buddhist methods. He clearly recognized the immobilization technique and Wuxia sword. The combination and complementarity of the two Buddhist superpowers were indeed unparalleled and astounding. What would happen when the Alakanatha battle form encountered the Wuxia sword? The light of Buddha on Futian's body was dazzling incessantly. The Vajra spell was spat out from him and landed on those pairs of heavenly eyes. However, the Wuxia sword had already smashed down and blasted on the battle form. Suddenly, cracks in the Alakanatha battle form appeared. At the same time, the body began to fall apart, and the Vajra spell struck many heavenly eyes, destroying them completely. The Wuxia sword smashed down, and just it was about to make contact with Futian's body, another blazing light of Buddha bloomed. The golden light overwhelmed the sky with indescribable radiance. A Buddha rose up, pushing the Wuxia sword upward in the opposite direction. A golden sun appeared above the firmament. Futian seemed to have incarnated into an ancient Buddha, whose brilliance was shining through the ages. A golden divine flame was burning upon the Buddha's body. So fervent and strong was it that the Wuxia sword began to catch on fire and started burning. Little by little, it was being destroyed. Mahavairakana. All the Buddhas were a little taken aback by what they were seeing. Futian had previously displayed two powerful Buddhist superpowers, the Alakanatha battle forms and the Vajra spell. Now he was unleashing a third Buddhist superpower, the Mahavairakana. How did he achieve that? The Mahavairakana Buddha was a Dharmakaya. The Mahavairakana was considered one of the strongest Dharmakayas in Buddhism. Even many of the top great Buddhas in Buddhism found it challenging to cultivate. It required total mastery of Buddhist methods in order to comprehend a thing or two about it. How could Futian be capable of cultivating the Mahavairakana? It's not right. There is no Mahavairakana cultivation in any of the ancient temples. All that was there were just a few simple introductions. So how did he cultivate it? Unless he did not just start cultivating Buddhist methods in the past few months, but had started cultivating it a long time ago. Some Buddhist cultivators questioned this remarkable event. Mahavairakana is one of the most powerful Dharmakayas of Buddhism. It was never passed on to outsiders. How did he cultivate it? Where did he steal it from? Someone else questioned in an accusatory tone. Buddha Lord, this young man's intention is highly suspect. His cultivation should be abolished. Someone looked at the great Buddhas high above and suggested. Just as they were talking amongst themselves, the Mahavairakana was still expanding, burning the Wuxia sword to a crisp, breaking through the immobilization technique, And all those pairs of heavenly eyes. A thunderous rumbling sound came out, and the boundless and massive Mahavarakana raised his palm and slammed it forward. When it was unleashed, it was obvious that it was none other than the palm of Mahavarakana. The Buddhist cultivator summoned the Dharmakaya to contend, but the terrifying palm of Mahavarakana blasted down, shattering everything. There was a loud bang as cracks appeared on the ground. That Buddhist cultivator grunted, as if he was about to be crushed. He spat out a mouthful of blood, and his golden body broken into pieces. Bang! With a loud boom, the palm of Mahavarakana smashed the golden body into pieces, leaving a terrible giant palm print on the ground, and it then dissipated and disappeared. However, that Buddhist cultivator was now breathing shallowly as blood came out of the corners of his mouth. He looked extremely weak. He had clearly lost the ability to fight again. When they looked at Yi Futian once more, they saw the light of Buddha shine brightly on the vast space, and the Mahavarakana radiated infinitely rays of light. It was as if Yi Futian had already proved himself as a Buddha. At this moment, Yi Futian was like the true Buddha. Chapter 2478, The Threat. Chapter 2478, The Threat. Mahavarakana. The Buddhist cultivator who was defeated by Yi Futian just stared at him. He had cultivated Buddhist methods for many years under Shinyan Buddha Lord. He had followed him all these years, and had the opportunity to be preached and taught by the Buddha Lord himself. However, even so, some of the most profound Buddhist methods were still difficult to cultivate. This Mahavarakana was considered a top-level Buddhist method, and was known as one of the strongest and most superior Dharmakayas in Buddhism. The Mahavarakana Buddha was a Dharmakaya Buddha, who once achieved in the cultivation of this Dharma, attained the Dharmakaya, and was incarnated as the Mahavarakana. It was extremely virile in nature and powerful beyond description. Incorruptible by any means, it was capable of overcoming all evil spirits. But this superior method that he was unable to cultivate, Yi Futian did. This cultivator from the divine prefecture had only been in contact with Buddhism for a few months. When did you cultivate the Mahavarakana? That Buddhist cultivator's eyes were solemn and grave, and he had quite forgotten about his own injury. The shock in his heart was stronger. It far surpassed the impact that physical injuries had imposed on him. Yi Futian did not respond. He put his hands together in front of him, looking at the great Buddha high above the spirit mountain, and said, "The Lord of all Buddhas preached Buddhism throughout the world. The hope is so that everyone in the world would be able to understand the mystery of Buddhism. Therefore, why is my cultivation of the Mahavarakana considered a sin? It ought to be regarded as my destiny with Buddhism." Amitabha, Wutian Buddha said with his hands together. Yi Futian's words are true enough. Buddhism spreads throughout the world. If he is able to cultivate it, then it is his destiny in Buddhism. Not to mention that his cultivation of it was complete. If anyone accused him of stealing while all the Buddha lords are still around, this statement would sound a little too far-fetched and absurd. All Buddhist superpowers were infinitely wondrous. How could Yi Futian learn of such superior Buddhist methods in secret? If he really did, they should have known easily enough. Even so, how did he cultivate this Mahavarakana? Shinyan Buddha Lord asked. He had always been somewhat hostile towards Yi Futian. Of course, this did not mean that he regarded Yi Futian as an enemy. In his eyes, Yi Futian was but a youngster who had relied on sneaky means to cause the demise of several lord-level figures. He had used the explosion of the divine body to injure Saint Jinchan severely. None of these happenings were based on Yi Futian's own strength. As a great Buddha in the world of Buddhism, why would he even care about an insignificant youngster like Yi Futian? But he disapproved of the way he behaved. Yi Futian raised his head to look at the person who was giving the lecture and replied, "What I said was consistent with the spirit of the lecture given by the Buddha Lord. What was wrong with that?" Shinyan Buddha Lord had claimed that he had merely cultivated superpowers of Buddhism and never really came into contact with the Buddha. What Yi Futian said was simply an extension of what had been said by Shinyan Buddha Lord. The great Buddha reprimanding him simply stared at Yi Futian, and he was not the only one. Many other Buddhist cultivators were looking at Yi Futian coldly as well. On this spirit mountain of Western heaven, Yi Futian dared to make such an outrageous statement. It wasn't just one or two people that he offended, but he was referring to all the Buddhas. However, one couldn't really say that what Yi Futian had said was false. If another Buddhist cultivator were to jump out and accuse him, wouldn't it be a confession of sorts, saying that they didn't think they were worthy of the title of Buddha? We have heard that while you were still in the divine prefecture, Benefactor Yi offended various forces there and cultivators from every major world. Therefore, you ended up with nowhere to go. Now that we have personally experienced it, truly, seeing is believing, a Buddha said with a smile on his face. His true intention was hard to detect. Ever since I first came to the Western world of Buddhism, I have been plotted against and hunted down to be controlled from the very beginning. Could it be that as soon as I arrived, I had already offended the cultivators of this world? Yi Futian responded, "It is said that there are also Buddhist cultivators among these people. I wonder if this is the reason why all you elders detested me so." Benefactor Yi was overly sensitive about my words, the laughing Buddha said with a smile, but did not continue to say anything more. Yi Futian surveyed the Buddhas around him. Before he came here today, he had already offended some of them. He really didn't care if he offended a few more. However, he needed to leave before the end of the All Buddhas Fest. Of course, if he could meet with the Lord of all Buddhas, that would be another matter entirely. Of course, the most important matter at the moment was still to continue testing their skills in Buddhist methods. Yi Futian continued to move forward with the light of Buddha from the Mahavajrayana. He said, "I have just been exposed recently to Buddhism, and my methods are just average. I want to learn from other Buddhist cultivators who have much higher attainment in Buddhism than myself." When Yi Futian spoke, he glanced in the direction where Shinyan Buddha Lord was. The implication was evident. Since he had suggested Yi Futian's cultivation in Buddhist methods was lowly and not worthy, Yi Futian meant to goad him into dispatching some accomplished and learned disciples under him for a challenge. Chapter 2479, Sweep. Chapter 2479. Sweep. Shinyan Arhat did not step forward. In the Western heaven, there were many Buddhas, and Shinyan Buddha Lord was one of the Buddhas who stood at the peak of the realm. Shinyan Arhat was the chosen successor of Shinyan Buddha Lord. He represented Shinyan Buddha Lord as his most outstanding disciple. Here on Spirit Mountain, he was also the most prominent Buddha of his generation. He was situated at the top of the upper heavens of Spirit Mountain. His standing was apparent from this. Although Yi Futian already posed a threat to his ability, Yi Futian still had to make his way past many Buddhist cultivators to get here. For now, Shinyan Arhat did not need to act. However, Yi Futian was not bothered with who would attack him. The Mahavajrayana battle form still remained. He walked up slowly into the sky. He was not moving fast, but each step he took was stable and firm. It made people feel as though he was as solid and unmovable as a boulder. A Buddhist cultivator stepped forward. He was at the peak of the 9th tier of the Buddhist path. Now only Buddhist cultivators at this level could contend with Yi Futian in Buddhist doctrine. Right out of the gate, a 9th tier cultivator came to fight him. Among 8th tier Buddhist cultivators, only Arhat level figures had the chance of going against Yi Futian. "I wish to experience Benefactor Ye's Buddhist doctrine firsthand," said the monk who emerged. He stood in the sky above Yi Futian, and was an older Buddhist cultivator. He had immersed himself in the 9th tier of the Buddhist path for many years. He had high attainments in terms of Buddhist doctrine. It was just that he had yet to break through the shackles of the path and experience Buddha's tribulation. "Master, please do not hesitate to give me some pointers," replied Yi Futian politely as he placed his palms together. As he said this, the unparalleled golden light of Buddha radiated from the other party's floating figure. The silhouette of a bodhisattva appeared. It was sitting cross-legged on a golden lotus and reciting mantras. Immediately, endless mantras reverberated in the space. It was as though various silhouettes of Buddhas appeared at the same time in the sky. The mantras circled around Yi Futian and echoed throughout the space. In an instant, it enveloped the top of Spirit Mountain. It was a Buddhist spell. Futian instantly sensed this. Not only did he sense it, but he was even brought into a different space. Inside the space, he saw the dazzling silhouettes of golden Buddhas. They appeared divine. Before the Buddhas, a mirror with many images appeared. The images were surprisingly of his life. They were all the things that he had done. Most of them showed massacres. For instance, one image was of the death of Lord Six Desires and Great Elder Matian. After they died, the misery faced by their loved ones surfaced. Their fortunes were liquidated, and their fates were miserable. The palm of Mahavarakana lit up the space. It crashed into the other party's body. The outcome was the same as before. His opponent was immediately injured and spat out fresh blood. Bang! Futian did not stop moving at all, and continued to advance. His footsteps were firm, as though his faith was even more resolute at this moment. No one could stop him. Amitabha! Another Buddha stepped forward. The light of Buddha radiated, and he unleashed his Buddhist battle form, causing the figure of an ancient Buddha to appear. Futian looked up. This time he did not bother making any small talk. He immediately sent a palm of Mahavarakana crashing forward and smashing the space. It charged straight towards the Buddhist cultivator, and did not give the other party any opportunity to unleash any Buddhist doctrine. Since they were comparing their Buddhist doctrine, these Buddhas should first display an ability, on par with Futian's, to qualify to have a conversation with him. Otherwise, if they took their sweet time, how long would he need to reach the very top, and meet the Lord of all Buddhas? Rumble! A loud sound could be heard again. After experiencing the Buddhist spell and doubting himself, he was actually even stronger now. It was as though he had undergone a true metamorphosis and become Mahavarakana. As his palm strike descended, no Buddha could stand in his way. The scene before them shocked the various Buddhas. The various Buddhas in the sky stared at the silhouette. Aside from the sound of Futian's attacks and his footsteps, the spirit mountain of Western Heaven, where various Buddhas gathered, actually became eerily quiet as they watched Futian advancing step by step. One by one, the Buddhist cultivators fell before Futian. It was as though there was no Buddha who could block Futian's path. Futian managed to conquer many stages with only the palm of Mahavarakana and Vajra spell. A few hours later, Futian had almost arrived at the peak of Spirit Mountain. Only the last few stages were left. Even the few arhats that he had met were sitting above his current stage. He was close to reaching them. These arhats would most likely attack him now. The various arhats and Buddha lords witnessed how Futian made his way towards them step by step. They felt as though they were seeing another Donghuang, the great, a few centuries later. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.